Probably in one of the infinite realities I do.
That's how she starts her talks. Oh, sorry.
So today we're going to get started on making history. I'm very honored for each and every one of you to be here with me in this eternal now moment. We're debuting unity theory, the universal natural intelligence theory of energetics, for the very first time in a conference setting. So this is a very important moment in human history because nobody in all of human history has been able to explain how gravity, dark matter, and dark energy all work. And so I'm going to talk about unity theory, and I'm also going to talk about how it can lead us to global contact. So many of us in this room know that there are benevolent beings out there. If you were at my talk yesterday, then you would have learned that many of them are very loving, and they're holding space for us as we go through these dark times, doing all of our shadow work as a collective. And so yesterday, I just want to be clear, yesterday was a very fun, interactive time. I still want a lot of interactivity today, but it's going to be a little bit more about the science behind it. So it's going to be more mind-blowing, more consciousness expanding, rather than comedic relief. Although I'm kind of a goofy guy, so I'm sure you're all going to laugh at me at some point. But again, this is my story. Everything that I share with you, it's 100% what I experienced. I'm not here to, make up any details and try to impress everyone. That just doesn't help me or you in any way. So take what resonates and disregard what doesn't. So the thing about unity theory is that it's not just about gravity, dark matter, and dark energy. It's the science of consciousness, or the science of spirituality. That's kind of why I go by the moniker the Crimson Eagle, because the crimson represents the root chakra, the earthly realm, and the eagle represents the spirituality, the big picture perspective of what's going on. So my greatest inspirations when it came to unity theory were Einstein and his theory of relativity, Alan Watts and his concepts on metaphysics, and Tesla. No, not that Tesla. This Tesla. The real Tesla. And what he said about energy, frequency, and vibration. So, I also want to quickly apologize for the lack of color in these slides. I'm a little bit colorblind in this incarnation, so it's all the same to me. But so the universal natural intelligence unifies all things by being all things and experiencing everything from each individual perspective of reality, meaning that the structure of our reality is holodynamic. One piece of the entire universe experiences the whole thing within its perception. So that's what it means to be holodynamic. Because each and every one of us are the whole, and we experience the entirety of our reality within our mind, this means that we are not an organism in a foreign environment. We are an organism environment. That's what we are. We are everything. And so because that is the case, our true potential is far greater than anything we've been led to believe in mainstream society. Looking around, we can see the intricate patterns within patterns of how the universe works. Over here, we have neuron mapping inside of the brain. Over here, we have the mapping of the universe. Notice how you could get quite confused, as I did yesterday, with differentiating which one's which. Is that human? Is that the universe? Vice versa? Same thing here. We see the universe and nebulas and galaxies reflected in our own eyes, the windows to the soul. How poetic. And again, yesterday I got all confused because this is the birth of a cell and this is the death of a star, and I just kept getting them backwards because they're so similar. So, in the universal natural intelligence, from the water to the dirt, to the worms, to the flowers, to the bees, to the trees, and even to the air that we breathe. Each aspect of life sees the universe from its own unique perspective, yet it takes all perspectives in play to create the entirety of the reality we experience. So a few notes about what my predecessor said about some of these concepts is that Tesla mentioned, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. This is how we've gotten so far into things like quantum mechanics, quantum theory, string theory. If you look at the common theme between these scientific perspectives, you'll find confusing things, you'll find convoluted things, overcomplicated things. And to me, that's not how reality works. Reality is intuitive. This is a universal natural intelligence. It's going to do everything in the most simple, effective way possible. And that aligns with Occam's razor. Usually the simplest answers are the best ones. Einstein said, people like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. So this is what led to the spur of unity theory. I was originally writing a science fiction novel in which I was hoping would be the next big Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or something like that, which would touch on the issues of our reality. But as I was trying to figure out a way to explain time and how it worked to my readers, I was looking into the theory of relativity. I was looking into what is called simultaneity, the idea that all of time happens at once, which is directly what Einstein is referring to in this quote. That's why it is an illusion, because almost all physics and mainstream science reports, although they don't really go into it much, because then we'll figure out the truth, it's all happening at once. So as Watts said, the future is a concept. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because the time is always now. It's never not now. So this led me to a beautiful artistic depiction of an example of how this works. So this beautiful drawing represents someone standing in the present moment. And in the present moment, we're always in flow, so it makes sense. You know, if I'm that figure up there, I can move around. This makes sense metaphorically. But if the past is still happening now, as physics reports, since everything is happening right now, then I imagine the past as a mirror in front of that individual. And that mirror reflected how we view our past. We can look in our memories, but typically we only look at one set of memories at a time. So that's that one reflection, and we often literally say that we reflect on our past. So I thought, well, if we're on a timeline and the universe is made out of symmetries, then the future must be behind the individual. And I thought this complied with logic because we cannot see the future. And so what I realized is that in a sudden realization, the present moment was infinitely multiplied into the past and into the future. Meaning that if all of time happens at once, all of those infinite moments are all still happening right now. Meaning that each and every one of you have always been sitting in this room listening to this conversation, this talk. And you always will be here. But your awareness will shift into the infinite moments, the vibrational frequencies, since everything is energy and frequency, in which you move out of this room, you move on to other parts of your life. We're all still being born. We're all still realizing our dreams. So I call this concept chronoconcurrency, meaning that all of time happens at once. And so when I took this example of the mirrors and I took it to another level, I thought, well, there are instances in which we have shifted things in the past. Something I'll go into in a little bit called the Mandela effect, is proof that the past is actually not as permanent as we thought it was. Meaning that it is only the now that is the true experience that we're having. This is the only real thing. And so I took those mirrors and I multiplied them around the observer infinitely. And what I got looked very much like that. A reflective sphere, only we would be inside of that reflective sphere. And that sphere is perfect because the more that you zoom in on a sphere, the more that you can explore an infinite amount of surface area. Meaning that in order for time to work the way that it does, all of these moments have to exist simultaneously. Then, while I was in my closet-converted office in my Ann Arbor apartment in Michigan, I flashed back to this experience I had when I was 16 years old and I was experimenting with dimethyltryptamine, DMT, also known as the spirit molecule. And after one inhalation of the spirit molecule, I was immediately transported. Oh, this is a fun part. So at the time, I was inhaling it out of a bong. And I had packed the DMT in between two little bits of cannabis. And I started to inhale it, and the bong immediately got, I want to say, 3 miles long. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? And then suddenly I started picking up my eye drops container cap that was kind of the shape of a triangle. And I couldn't see where the eye drops container cap ended and where it began. It was infinite. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? And it got to the point where my vision started to appear in the shape of a circle, or maybe even a sphere. And that vision started to multiply in every direction as far as I could perceive. And it looked very similar to something like this. And in hindsight, I realized that, oh my gosh, I'm getting chills thinking about it. I was experiencing what it was like to be aware of all of the infinite moments that all of the other infinite versions of me was experiencing right then. And when I was looking at the cap that I was holding in my fingers, the reason it was infinite and it was spinning on its own was because in infinite other realities, I was twisting the cap off of the eye drops container. But in the one that I wasn't, it was just in my hand. And so I realized that this has to be the truth. So with this in mind, it can be accurate to say that all of time happens at once only if every moment imaginable infinitely exists in the eternal now. That means that if you can imagine something, not only is it possible, it already exists. This means that everything we've ever believed in, everything that we felt true to be in our hearts, angels with wings, mermaids, fairies, all of it is real. So, this takes us to my next findings. I thought, this is huge. Because something I'll go into in a little bit is this understanding of time brought me into realizations about how the universe works, how we can reach our full potential, how we've been looking at everything backwards, and how bringing this information to the world can help liberate us, help us to transcend suffering. And so I started to consider intuitively that the universe had a container. That although we live in an infinite universe, somehow, some way, it wouldn't make sense if I could perceive, if I could imagine that there are other universes outside of this one. To me, that implies of my awareness deep within that it's the truth. So I started thinking, if the universe is expanding and there are other universes outside of it, and we're in some sort of container, then wouldn't that mean it's bumping into other things as it's expanding? And I thought, no, that doesn't sound right. And so I started following my intuition. But before I explain what I found, I'm going to explain to you what mainstream science tells us dark energy, dark matter, and gravity are. So firstly, we have dark energy. Dark energy is the alleged expansion of the universe. It's confirmed by measuring distant galaxies as they move further and further away from ours. And the thing about this, it's kind of strange, is that over perceived linear time, it happens at an increasing rate, meaning that it's getting further and further apart faster and faster as linear time goes on. So this is what dark energy looks like. Here we have two galaxies, and we're starting to see them get further and further apart, and the more further that they get away from each other, the faster they seem to get away. So that's dark energy. Moving on, we have dark matter. So dark matter are the unexplained gravitational anomalies of the universe. And what mainstream scientists define as dark matter, or the criteria that justifies dark matter, is that the orbital patterns in many galaxies would not make sense unless there was more mass in play, mass being something separate from energy, which I don't subscribe to, and the observable phenomena such as gravitational lensing. So these pictures in the background, these are gravitational lenses. They look like little bubbles which light kind of curves around and then continues on its trajectory. So gravity has been taught to us to historically be a force. So who in this room, with a raise of hands, thinks that gravity is a force? Don't be shy. Okay, so we got a few hands. Do any of you think it's not a force? A few hands. Okay, there's people not raising their hands.
Safe answer.
Okay, so if you think that it might be a force, then you might be agreeing with these people. NASA. So, NASA, right on their website, says gravity is the force by which a planet or other body draws objects towards its center. Does anybody know what NASA means in Hebrew? Extra credit, I'll give you a gold star, I promise. NASA means to deceive in Hebrew. What are the chances of that, huh? So, for those of you that thought maybe gravity is not a force, you would be agreeing with this gentleman. So, Einstein said in his theory of relativity that gravity is not a force, it is a consequence of the curvature of space-time caused by the uneven distribution of mass. Now, I love Albert. I love Albert more than most people. But I still can't make heads or tails of what the heck that means. So I started thinking, all right, how can I make this more palatable, more digestible for people in, average society to understand? And that's when I learned of Einstein's idea called the cosmological constant. So back in 1917, Einstein used the cosmological constant to solve an issue that was very strange for him. See, back then, they had no idea that the universe was expanding. And so, as Einstein was working on his equations, he started to see, wait a second, my equations are telling me that the universe is expanding. Was? No. That's too weird. That is far too weird. And so he made the cosmological constant to force a static universal model into his equation. But the thing is, something changed. Einstein actually regretted this decision because in 1931, the Hubble telescope revealed that the universe was expanding. So what did Einstein do? He altered the meaning of the variable. Cosmological constant is also known as the lambda variable. And so he altered the lambda variable to account for new space, because he proposed that if the universe is expanding, but nothing is losing density, then there has to be a reason why we're not losing density. Because if the universe is expanding, shouldn't we be expanding too? And so he proposed that there was most likely a source of new space, but he couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So the lambda variable is one of the keys to unlocking unity theory and to understanding how the whole system works together. So we have some questions we need to ask ourselves here. What causes the alleged expansion of the universe? Where does the new space Einstein theorized come from? And if gravity is not a force, then what is it? The answer is what I call universal spatial pressurization. Try and say that 5 times fast. So, universal spatial pressurization is my answer to gravity, dark matter, and dark energy. Which leads to the first question: what causes the expansion of the universe? Now, this is another extra credit question, and I'll give you a hint. The answer I'm looking for starts with P, and it may be a bit more philosophical than scientific. Does anyone have an idea? It has to relate to how we experience reality.
Projection. Perception.
Who said it? Perspective. That is the answer. So, perspective, perception, our paradigm, all these P words, that's how we experience the expansion of the universe. So, how do we create an infinite amount of space within a finite amount of space? Anybody? So here is another example, although it'll be slightly different. Pay attention to what happens this time, of what is historically referred to as dark energy, and tell me what you see happening. Pay attention to the space between the galaxies.
Further away, are they getting faster?
They're getting further and further away, but the space between them is the same. So what does that mean? How does this work? How do we create an expanding universe? How do we create an infinite amount of space within a finite amount of space? Everything shrinks. Everything is shrinking at the same rate. Everything is energy. So scientists in mainstream society won't tell you this because this gets weird with our idea of what's physical. But this is the only logical explanation for what we are experiencing. Holy shift in the scientific paradigm, right? And the patterns don't lie. You can see in this artistic depiction, our consciousness is speaking to us. Although it looks like this may be getting further and further away, you could also say that this is an interpretation of how everything is spiraling and shrinking at the same time. And where do we see this? We see this in fractal patterns that people experience under the influence of psychedelic medicine. We see this in nature, in seashells. We see this in the plant kingdom. That's a piece of cauliflower right there. And so, the patterns don't lie. I say often that truth is a paradoxical idea, because truth, at the objective perspective, can't exist in a relativistic universe at this level. The only objective truth would be the entire universe, knowing everything in totality. But, paradoxically, there are certain truths within the patterns that don't lie, that cannot be argued against. And that's what I believe patterns are here to show us. So, this shrinking that's happening, I call it universal scalar reduction. A scalar variable is one that is measured in magnitude or quantity. So you can imagine a balloon. The volume of a balloon would be a scalar variable. So if it gets bigger, its scalar value is increasing. If you let air out of it, it's decreasing. And so, really, I just wanted to sound cool when I And so, this leads us to our next question. Where does Einstein's new space come from? Enter dark matter. This is our friend, dark matter. Very friendly. But I just want to reiterate that dark matter, per mainstream science, is not visible. That's why it's called dark, because we can't see it with visible light. So when you're looking at this little guy here, this is really just something that we would perceive as a gravitational anomaly, such as a lens. But notice what happens during universal scalar reduction as the dark matter shrinks as well. So when anything is shrinking in our universe, per these ideas, then nothing is shrinking. Because if everything is shrinking at the same rate, then from the observer's perspective, everything's staying the same. And so as the dark matter shrinks, something is coming off of it. And this something is that new space that Einstein was talking about. And as the galaxies and the dark matter shrink together, more and more space is diffused into the universe. This is what I call the universal spatial pressurization constant, USP constant. And what this tells us is that what dark matter is high density space. That's it. It's that simple. There's no weird particle that we need to chase on a snipe hunt that doesn't exist. It's a lot more simple than it seems to be. Dark matter is high-density space that's diffusing into standard space, applying spatial pressure universally. But the thing is, notice, would we ever be able to see a change in let's say, the lens effect that we're witnessing? No, we wouldn't be able to, because it shrinks along with us. So this is why intuition is so important for science. If we stick to linear thinking, we're going to get nowhere fast. But if we follow our intuition and our hearts and our excitements and trust that we have the entirety of the universe within us, therefore all of the answers can come from within, that is when we're going to see the greatest advancements in science and technology. So, what is a good metaphor for this concept of dark matter? To me, dark matter the dark matter anomalies are the infinite hands of God, essentially guiding every planet, every sun, everything in existence to where it needs to go. Because me, as a pantheist, believing that the universe and God are the same thing when it comes down to the logical explanations of them, that means that this infinitely intelligent force, the universal natural intelligence, is guiding everything on each infinite timeline in order to have the experience of life. So, to the third question, what is gravity, if not a force? Here's a historical two-dimensional relativity experiment. So, in this experiment, the object placed on the stretchy fabric is supposed to represent mass that's in space-time that is causing a curvature of space-time. And again, to me, these just sound straight up confusing. It's energy. Energy in space, that's all we need. So what I do in unity theory is I explain the three-dimensional way of viewing this using simple terms like energy, space, and pressure. So what we see is that if there's a high energy density, let's say a planet like Earth, and it's in the fabric of space, and in this example here, it'd be sitting on the stretchy fabric, that high energy density causes a need for more space to be applied through it through the USP, universal spatial pressurization, and that pressure causes a higher density in the space. And so if you think about this example, imagine if you put like a 250-pound object on that stretchy fabric. If you were to roll a marble around the outside, it would almost immediately fall in. So that's what we see with spatial density. The higher spatial density is, the more likely something will fall into it. Or the easier something will fall into it. So here's an omnidimensional 3D spatial density example. And I know that sounds like a lot of science words, but it's a lot simpler than it sounds. So what I'm explaining is that clearly this is a two-dimensional screen, but we can imagine this as a three-dimensional sphere, okay? And so no matter what way you cut the sphere, you will always get the same results looking at this diagram. So here we have lines that represent spatial density. The closer that the lines are together, that's a higher spatial density. The further they are apart, that is a lower spatial density. Let's say out here is more like what we would experience in outer space, let's say, where you're just kind of floating along. So if we were to have a rocket ship, or let's call that the Elon ship, we'll have this Elon ship flying into increased spatial density. As it moves towards the increased spatial density, it will be experiencing more space at the same rate of linear time. So each of these individual, and these are imaginary because it would be an infinite spectrum. So this is just a way of quantizing or using our left brain linear thinking to understand it. But in each of these sections, all of the space equals x, meaning that this space is the same amount as this space, and so on. So if Elon's ship is coming through here, and it starts to move into this area, if it's going at 10 miles per hour, it's still going to be going at 10 miles per hour, but as it passes into higher density space, that 10 miles per hour is going to increase, relatively speaking, because it's moving through the same amount of space, but it's moving through more space, over the same amount of perceived linear time. Meaning that it's kind of slip and sliding into it faster and faster. And that's what we historically call the force of gravity, but it's not a force, it's a passive property of spatial density itself. So, what causes time dilation between two observers experiencing different energetic systems or different, let's say, planets? Well, it's the spatial density. The higher spatial density is, the greater the rate at which energy falls into it. Perceived linear time unfolds at rates that are relative to each observer's velocity or speed and spatial density. So what this means is if we're standing on Earth and someone's standing on Nibiru or Planet X or Planet 9, whatever you want to call it, and what many sources claim to report is that Nibiru is extremely high gravity dense, or we could call it's got a high energy density per unity theory. So someone here would be moving at a rate of 1 second per 1 second, and someone there in their own system would be moving at a rate of 1 second per second. But the thing is, when compared, the rates would be completely different. So on Nibiru, someone may be catapulting through time because that increased density that we saw in the earlier slide, right here, those density lines continue on all the way to the core of the planet. So someone standing on those density lines as the entire universe is shrinking into itself to create the experience of the expansion, then that means the higher the spatial density, the higher the gravity, whatever you want to call it. I'm trying to work with you guys here. It's kind of abstract, I get it. But the faster you move through space. And as we learn through unity theory, there is no time. There is only transformation to give us the experience of life. So time is relative. And so the higher gravity, spatial density is, the faster you move through time. And I thought in my talk yesterday, this led me to believing that we're much more likely to find evidences of civilizations within our own solar system on other planets. For example, Jupiter, I believe, has 2.5 times the gravity of Earth. So that's one variable that would add to someone on that planet moving faster through time in comparison to us. So, going back to the next subject, this rabbit hole took me to all these different experiences, all these different ideas, and I came back with my understanding of time to free will. Does anybody in here think free will is real? Just one person? 2 people? Whoa! So, let's talk about it for a second. So physicist John Bell equated Bell's inequalities, which I won't go into too much detail, to basically try and disprove Einstein. So Einstein thought that quantum entanglement was spooky. He called it spooky action at a distance. Because Einstein believed in locality, meaning that energetic systems have to interact with each other to be able to transmit information. Otherwise, information traveling over extremely long distances would be considering traveling at faster than light speeds, which per the theory of relativity wouldn't be possible. And so Bell proposed that Einstein was wrong, but I propose that both of them are technically wrong from a certain perspective. Bell proposed that there was one loophole to his hypothesis that would completely invalidate his ideas of his inequalities and how they proved that quantum entanglement was real and that information could travel faster than light speed. And this loophole also would make sense as to why there was spooky action at a distance, and it's called superdeterminism. Superdeterminism is the idea that everything on a single timeline is determined by previously existing causes. Now, I'll be very clear, the single timeline part in there is something that I put in there specifically. Because what I realize is, as a human being, what I experience is a single timeline. That's the way that I remember it. I have certain memories, they're permanent, I can't go back and change them. And as I showed through the infinity mirror experiment, that with just the two mirrors, all of the infinite moments leading up to our death and beyond are all existing. We just haven't experienced it yet. And so I thought, this is how it works. So if this is how it works, how can free will exist? Because I'm a supporter of free will. And so I realized the answer was infinite simultaneity. It was going back to that idea of all of the infinite simultaneous timelines occurring all at once. And I realized that the way that we experience free will is the way that we shift timelines. And so infinite simultaneity holds the answer to the free will paradox, which is free will both does exist and does not exist, depending on the way that you look at it. It holds the answer, or the clue to understanding our vibrational reality and why this is the one we're experiencing right now. And it is the key to the kingdom of heart and transcending suffering, knowing that we decide what moment we're experiencing. And so the proof in the pudding is the Mandela effect. In my reality, in my childhood, Nelson Mandela died before I was even born. In my reality growing up, my parents read to me the Berenstain Bears, S-T-E-I-N. In my reality, Arthur pulled Excalibur from the sword in the stone. But in this current timeline, Nelson Mandela lived until 2013. The Berenstain Bears were called the Berenstain Bears, S-T-A-I-N. And Arthur pulled the sword from an anvil? What? The movie's literally called The Sword in the Stone, so that's a pretty big one. And so what infinite simultaneity tells us is that every timeline imaginable exists. Each timeline is super deterministic, but it's not a problem because we experience free will by shifting timelines. And the greatest shifts that we all can quantify and use as validating experience for all of these theories and ideas happens at the collective level. Which leads me to the greatest key in unity theory, to being able to tap into our full potential. And that is the greatest illusion. What is the greatest illusion of mankind and the source of all of our suffering? Can anybody give it a guess?
Separation from God.
The illusion of separation. You get a gold star, whoever said that. We are all the universe. So each one of us holds the most powerful force of nature within us. The universal life force of unconditional love. The highest vibration in the entire existence of our reality. We are all the universe. This picture represents a singularity. And in a singularity, all possibilities exist. And since you are everything, and your potential is limitless, you are all the singularity. Every one of you. And I can honestly say that you all mean everything to me. So in unity theory, you get to choose the reality that you co-create with the collective of humanity. So moving forward, will you feed the reality of suffering, making decisions out of fear and separation? Or will you consciously create a new world full of unconditional love, giving that unconditional love to yourself at every moment with 100% accountability, 100% radical honesty first, and then showing that to everyone else? Because the universe is a mirror, so what you put out is reflected back to you. We learned this through the ancient 12 universal laws and the Hermetic principles in the Kybalion. We learned this through Emoto's water experiments, knowing that if we were to build structures with hatred and disgust and evil, which is live backwards, a backwards way of living, then we are going to be able to huff and puff and blow that house down real easy. But if we build structures out of love and symmetry, those structures will be far more powerful and withstand pretty much anything. And so frequency determines strength. Frequency determines our strength. And in the predictive programming, or what I call prophetic programming, knowing that all of those TV shows and movies that we watch are essentially windows into other infinite timelines that are just as real as this one, then those of you that seen The Matrix know that The Matrix was prophetic programming. Well, what are Marvel superhero movies? DC superhero movies. It's reminding of us of what we're capable of. So it's time to tap into our full potential. And one other way we can do that is by learning how the universe works through unity theory and ideas like holodynamics. So Dr. Victor Vernon Wolf wrote holodynamics in the 80s, and he taught it in Russia to maintain peace between the United States and Russia during the Cold War. He was instrumental in that, in fact. This is him. He's essentially the father of holodynamics, and he's a close friend of mine. So I gave Doc one of my books, and he read it within a day, and I asked him what he thought. And he looked at me and he said, well, it's not a theory. And then he asked me if there's anything that he could do for me. And I thought about it, and I was thinking, not really. Well, you know, there is one thing. Doc, do you think you could write something about my book? And so, Dr. Wolf, PhD, he wrote this for me. He said, we were born to be part of the greatest transition in history. This book shares a unique perspective of how the principles of natural science are reflected in your personal life, and how that has established productive relationships with others in the world around you. During this unique time of lifting the multidimensional veil, as we are experiencing moving from a state of conditioned slavery into an experience of self-potentialization, this book can serve as a roadmap for others on the path of reuniting our true family. So what does unity theory show us? That we cannot lose. There is absolutely nothing to fear but fear itself. The collective consciousness determines the reality we experience, and per the 12 universal laws and Emoto's experience, high vibration is innately more powerful than low vibration ever will be. Therefore, this means that the game is rigged in our favor. There is no probability, there's no chance that we could lose. We are the creators of this reality, and we're taking back our power. And the world is clearly waking up, everybody. Be excited. Get fired up. Because we see this in media like the OA, which explores multiple realities. We see this in Mr. Nobody, where a child explores all the possible timelines that he would experience throughout his life. We see this in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the Multiverse of Madness, Spider-Man No Way Home, another multiverse movie, and in my personal favorite, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Woo! I saw that.
Everything Everywhere All at Once is one of the best movies that I have ever seen in this life. And it is a perfect amalgamation of Dr. Wolf's ideas and holodynamics, reaching your full potential self, and my science and unity theory, explaining how there are infinite realities. Personally, in terms of semantics, I don't call it a multiverse. It's just how we can experience time in the first place. So this is how our universe works. And I just want you to know that you are not alone. I am here for each and every one of you, and every action that I take towards myself and towards everyone else is all about healing and uplifting and empowering and encouraging the collective so that we can all be the powerful divine beings that we are meant to be. And as a spiritual guide, I want you to know that I'm here to hold space. If there's any questions you have for me about blockages, certain things continuing to reflect in your reality, feel free to come to me. And know that I only take love donation. I do not charge for my services. In fact, my book can be found on my website, thecrimsoneagle.com, for free. This information needs to get out there, and there's a video on my website that is only 7 minutes long and talks about how real this is, how the government themselves has known about all of these ideas at least since the 80s through one of the declassified documents known as the Gateway Process. And so I just want to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for being you. We'll get into the raffle. I'm